You know, Madam Speaker, when House Republicans came to Olympia this session, we said that we were going to prioritize three things. We were going to try to make Washington safe, affordable, and accountable. And I'm pleased that this budget funds a lot of things that make Washington safe, affordable, and accountable, including some amendments that we proposed that were accepted just tonight. The gentleman from the 20th District proposed an amendment that was accepted that would study wastewater, the impacts of wastewater spilling into Puget Sound. The gentleman from the 15th District had an amendment to provide some money to study and address nitrate concentration in groundwater. That will make Washington more safe. We had amendments to make Washington more affordable. As the gentlelady from the 25th District pointed out, there are a number of families who are eligible for DD services, but they don't actually get them, and we're not sure why they're not getting them, whether they're simply declining them or this body hasn't been funding it to a sufficient degree. But if there are individuals who want services that we're not providing, I think the gentlelady's amendment that was accepted and incorporated into this budget will help figure out who those families are, and so we can come back here next year to provide the funding that's necessary and make life more affordable for them and their families. We also had ideas to make Washington State and our government more accountable. The gentleman from the 9th District to my left and myself both had amendments that deal with the ongoing crisis at Western State Hospital and the heretofore lack of accountability agency, and appreciate our ability to come up with good ways that both sides of the aisle could agree on might provide additional accountability for that agency. Was pleased that we are telling agencies that they are not allowed to negotiate fund source and providing an additional layer of accountability there. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, there's too much in this budget, or sometimes not in this budget, that makes Washington less safe and less affordable and less accountable. Unfortunately, we declined to fund forest health management and wildfire preparedness and prevention, despite the Commissioner of Public Lands begging us to do so. I think that is going to make Washington less safe, especially for those folks mainly on the east side of the mountains, but really all over the state, who live in fire-prone areas. For the kids who have asthma and can no longer play outside in the summer because of the effects of wildfire. I think our failure to fund forest health and wildfire prevention and preparedness is going to make Washington less safe. We spent a lot of time talking about whether we could afford tax cuts, and I still sincerely believe that we can, and I'll get to that in a minute. But by declining to return any of this $2.4 billion surplus to the taxpayers, we're making Washington less affordable for hardworking families. And while this budget does spend a lot of money to address the growing homelessness crisis, I worry that it does so in a way that lacks much accountability. For the 5 years I've been here, we have continued to try to make investments to address the crisis, but unfortunately the crisis continues to get worse. And despite our best efforts, simply throwing more money at the problem, I don't think is going to fix the problem. I think we need to include accountability measures that will make sure that money is spent in a way that delivers results, that brings people off the streets, delivers the services they need, but also improves the lives and safety of the rest of the community who's having to deal with the second-order effects to public safety and sanitation that co-occurs when there is a significant unaddressed homelessness problem in our cities, suburbs, and rural areas. And so, Madam Speaker, I think there's a number of ways in which this budget falls short. Despite a $2.4 billion surplus to spend over 4 years, this budget spent nearly every last dollar and leaves less than a $50 million ending fund balance. And as the gentleman from the 2nd District mentioned a minute ago, that ensures that when that next downturn comes, we will have one of two choices, neither of which we want to make. We will either have to cut critical services that hardworking Washington families have grown to depend on and rely on, or we're going to have to ask struggling families to pay more in taxes. And I think that is a bad approach. I think we could have done better. As we pointed out in two different striking amendments we attempted to offer to the underlying budget, our surplus is so large that we could have funded the entire governor's budget, a budget that a long list of unions, interest groups, government agencies all came down to testify in support of, and only the community bankers testified in opposition to. 3 weeks ago, that was considered a good budget and a good supplemental year. I've been on a number of panels since session started with the director of OFM, and he has continually defended the good, prudent investments made by that budget. We could have funded that entire budget, including the governor's homelessness policy, in a sustainable manner out of the general fund rather than the rainy day fund, and still funded $1 billion in tax cuts to working families, and still had another $700 million left over to address our other shared priorities. And I'm disappointed that we did not take advantage of our ability to offer meaningful tax relief to those hardworking Washington families. Madam Speaker, I've been here since 2015, and the governor's been in office since 2013. And since he took in office, after we pass this budget tonight, spending will have increased by over 75%. Madam Speaker, has your personal family income grown by 75% since 2013? I know that mine hasn't, and I don't know if many of my constituents have either. Yet government now gets to spend 75% more than it did in 2013. And I don't think that's appropriate to go home and tell our constituents that we get to enjoy a 75% increase in our spending ability when they're lucky if they have a 20 or 30% increase in their spending ability. Madam Speaker, the revenue that this state's growing economy has blessed us with is more than sufficient to invest in critical government services and provide meaningful tax cuts to hardworking Washington families. And we made repeated attempts tonight on this floor to do just that, and unfortunately we were rebuffed. But I don't think we'll give up. And so I'm going to vote no tonight, Madam Speaker, because despite spending $2 billion on new programs, the opportunity cost is far more than that. The opportunity cost of passing an unsustainable budget means that we'll be back here at some point. It might not be next session or the session after that, but it will happen. These economic times cannot continue forever. And when that does happen, we will face that painful choice between cutting services or raising taxes. This budget spent a number of one-time funds, including a one-time bump in unexpected estate tax collections on ongoing problems. That's unsustainable. We have a significant surplus that we decline to use to pay down any of our liabilities or invest in protecting our assets by funding forest health, or pay down our liabilities, such as our unfunded pension liability that the gentleman from the 14th District proposed doing. This budget makes aggressive assumptions about federal dollars coming into this state, and I hope those assumptions prove to be true, but who knows what Congress will do, Madam Speaker. I'm not sure, no matter which party's in charge, we can trust Washington, D.C. And at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, despite all the good things in this budget, it builds an unsustainable bow wave, and it really sets us up for a difficult decision to make in future years when those economic times are no longer so good, and tax revenue is no longer so high, and caseloads are no longer declining at the rate they're declining. So unfortunately, Madam Speaker, despite the best effort put into this budget, the best of intentions, and all the good things it does fund, it misses the mark. By not backfilling the transportation budget, we're inviting a gas tax in future years. We are setting ourselves up to have to make painful cuts to services or painfully ask our constituents to pay more in taxes. So, Madam Speaker, I regret to ask for no vote because instead of putting people first, this budget puts the government first.